What's up, everybody? Jordan from Ginger Snap Disc Golf. Today we're going to be talking about how to hit gaps, really small gaps. We're going to play probably 3-5 holes, something like that. We're out here at Magnolia Links Disc Golf Course in Gardendale, Alabama. Super beginner friendly course, kind of like a pitch and putt course, but the back nine, which is where we're at now, has a bunch of shots with just very small initial gaps. I'm also going to go ahead and tell you right now, I'm going to leave a bunch of the shots in here where I don't hit the gap, and we're going to break down why I didn't hit that gap. I have 3 tips today that I think is going to help you improve hitting your gaps, and we're going to talk about them as I play through the course. But jumping right into it, tip number 1, I want to talk about using your foot to aim. This isn't really talked about enough. A lot of times we think we're missing gaps because of something to do with our arm, and that is the case a lot of times because you can grip lock or early release, but in an ideal world, you didn't grip lock, you didn't early release or anything like that. If you have your foot in the proper alignment with the gap, realistically, you're going to be able to hit the gap without even having to look at it. Well, I mean, technically my foot is directly at that tree. Let's try that again. We'll play a couple of holes and I'll throw a couple of shots and I'll slow them down and I'll show you wherever my foot is going to be where my disc goes.
On these first 2 throws, my foot is landing a little bit to the right of the gap. As you can tell, my disc is making it through the gap but going right. And on these next 2 throws, I'm more centered in the gap with my foot, and therefore I'm peering the gap the whole way through with the disc.
So obviously we're not going to be really focused on score. Probably just going to go with my best shot off the tee. But as y'all saw from those tee shots, I hit the gap a couple of times pretty pure all the way through this tight tunnel shot. And the ones that I didn't, if you'll notice, you'll see my foot was either a little bit too much left or my foot was either a little too much right. And it's one of those little things of, obviously you're not gonna hit the gap every single time 100%, but there are little things like these tips I'm gonna talk about that can drastically improve your gap hitting. And if your gap hitting is better, you're gonna be more confident throwing. If you're more confident throwing, it's just gonna lead to overall better scoring rounds and all sorts of other things. Doesn't matter how many gaps you hit if you can't putt. When I'm talking about hitting the gap, I'm mainly talking about initial gaps like we saw on the other hole. Obviously there's so many other factors, like if you have a huge tunnel shot or something like that, it's more than just hitting the gap. There's so much more that goes into it. It's that way. It's that way. You're welcome. That's all that matters. Met a really nice guy. He's practicing for a tournament. He threw some tee shots and he just made a big putt. So that's really cool. So even if I'm doing a standstill, I'm still focused on where's my foot.
On this first throw, my foot is positioned too much left, as are my hips, causing me to miss the gap. I make the adjustment on the second throw, having my foot a little bit more towards the gap, enabling me to pure the gap. And it just shows really how important it is that your foot lines up with the gap that you were aiming for.
So there are some other factors other than just aiming with your foot. Obviously there's a lot more of it that comes into play, but I do believe that that's the first tip and the first step to be successful with hitting a gap. There's some other things that come into play that we're going to talk about it on this next hole. So tip number 2, disc selection. Super important when it comes to hitting gaps, probably more so than you would think. So in my hand I have 4 different discs. I've got an ESP Buzz, I have a Jester Disc Golf Love, an A5 from Prodigy, and then an A2 from Prodigy. When it comes to disc selection, you're gonna have to choose what is the best way to hit the gap for you. And this is something you're gonna have to learn through trial and error. So for some people, they hit gaps best by throwing a harsh Anheuser and just using the entire tunnel all the way through that way. Some people, I don't know why I'm pointing at myself, this isn't me, but some people will just throw a disc perfectly flat and just point and shoot through the gap. And then some people throw a little bit of a hyzer flip to move through the gap that way. So depending on what your preference is going to depend on what disc you go with. Got like a super straight mid-range that I could throw soft and just kind of hyzer flip to straight. Super straight putter, I could do the same. Then I have a couple of overstable options or more overstable options that if I wanted to do more of like a flat line or a flex line, I could use either one of these. Go with the Jester Disc Golf Love first. It's about 250 feet, dead straight tunnel, kind of a low ceiling. I'm gonna go with like a slight hyzer, and I'll probably slow this down so we can see my foot and we can see if my disc selection was good. That wasn't bad, I'm not gonna lie. For fun, I'm gonna try a flat line and then also an Anheuser line so you can see all of them. And I yanked the flat line. All right, we're gonna try the Anheuser line, and this is purely for entertainment purposes. If you know anything about me, I cannot throw Anheuser. All right, one more time. All right, that was pretty good. For someone who can't throw Anheuser, not bad. My Anheuser shot is right here, pretty much parked. Given it was the second attempt of an Anheuser, most comfortable shot is actually over here to the right. Oh, come on. Nailed it. So y'all can tell how important disc selection is. It's almost as important as foot placement. Like, you aiming with your foot is going to set you up to hit the gap. But even if you hit the gap, but you did not use the correct disc, the result's still not going to be as good as it could be. I hit the gap with every single shot that I threw, the initial gap at least. But my disc selection and my shot shape selection is what ultimately mattered in getting close enough to the pin to score. Before we go into the third tip, I want to show you how these first two tips even apply to the forehand. It's really the same concept. When you're throwing a forehand, you want your foot pointing in the direction that you want to throw. My biggest struggle with this is a lot of times my foot will be pointing a little bit to the right of where I want to throw, and I end up having to like pull across my body, and it's not good. I'm going to show you a couple examples of a good aiming point with my foot and then a bad aiming point. I know a lot of those still hit some trees high, but the whole point is I just want to show you the difference of how when my foot is not pointing the right direction, I'm sawing off those forehands into the edge of the woods. And when I'm pointed and set myself up for the right direction, even with forehand, you can tell I still get through the initial gap. And pretty much, I mean, both of those that hit the gap are in circle one. So I would say that's mission accomplished when it comes to hitting the gap. Tip number 3 is find an aiming point beyond the gap. Let's break that down. If I'm fully focused on just getting through this gap, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, my mind is focused on a tree and not the gap. I'm not thinking about not hitting these trees. What I'm thinking about is the basket's 250 feet that way. My aim point is the basket. I throw my normal slide hyzer shot and let the disc do the work. I'm gonna make sure my foot gets in the right place. I'm gonna make sure I pick the right disc. And then lastly, I'm gonna make sure I find an aiming point beyond the gap. If y'all enjoyed the video, this is the last hole we're gonna play. I might do a couple ace runs, who knows. But I just wanted to show you how this last tip also applies to the forehand. It's even kind of easier to do with the forehand because you get to watch the whole time when you throw a forehand and you don't want to backhand. Go in. It's gonna happen. That's it. That's it. That's it. Try. How does that not go in? All right, that's all I got for y'all. I love y'all. Thank y'all so much for the support so far. We're over 600 subscribers. Next stop's 1K. We're excited about what's coming up on the channel next. I actually have a huge announcement where I'm going to be doing some traveling over the country to shoot some disc golf content. So y'all stick around for that. As always, stay snappy. Love y'all. I'm about to put a clip up here of a very difficult gap that I'm probably not going to hit. Hope you enjoy. There it is. There's the tree hit.